The gavel slams. A black man, Malik Jackson, is forced to plead guilty by the racist Judge Arthur Redding. The judge smirks, thinking he's just put another thug away. He doesn't know his courtroom is a stage. He doesn't know Malik is a federal agent. And he doesn't know his entire corrupt world is about to be shattered by the very man he just sentenced. This is the story of how the hunter became the hunted, right in his own courtroom. The air in courtroom 3B of the Harrington Federal Courthouse was always stale, thick with the smell of old paper, floor wax, and quiet desperation. Presiding over this domain was Judge Arthur Redding, a man whose black robes seemed woven from his own arrogance. His face, framed by silver hair, was a permanent mask of disdain. Redding ran his courtroom like a medieval fiefdom. He was known for his efficiency, which was a polite term for a brutal, assembly line approach to justice that disproportionately crushed poor and minority defendants. On this Tuesday morning, the docket was heavy. "Next case," Redding barked, not looking up from his files. "The People versus Malik Jackson." The side door buzzed open, and two bailiffs led a man in an orange jumpsuit. He was black, in his late 2B, with a 5-day-old beard and a look of profound exhaustion. This was Malik Jackson. His public defender, Sarah Jenkins, met him at the table. She was young, fiercely intelligent, but drowning in a caseload that would have broken a team of 5. She had received Malik's file only 48 hours ago. "The charges are possession with intent to distribute and resisting arrest," Sarah whispered quickly, her voice tight. "The arresting officer is Robert Keene. Ring a bell?" Malik shook his head, his eyes scanning the courtroom. He wasn't looking at the exits, he was memorizing the faces. The stenographer, the bailiffs, the prosecutor, and the judge. "Mr. Jackson," Judge Redding's voice boomed, cutting through the air. "You are charged with possession of 50 grams of fentanyl and assault on Officer Keene. How do you plead?" Sarah stood immediately. "Your Honor, my client pleads not guilty. We request bail be set at a reasonable amount. Mr. Jackson is a first-time, non-violent offender." Redding scoffed, a truly ugly sound. "A first-time offender? With 50 grams of poison, counsel, and resisting arrest? That's not non-violent in my book." He leaned forward, staring down at Malik. "These streets are overrun with this filth. It's time we started cleaning them." The racism was a toxic fog in the room, so thick you could taste it. He wasn't just talking about the drugs. "Your Honor," Sarah pressed, "Officer Keene's report is inconsistent. Mr. Jackson maintains the drugs were planted after he was unjustifiably subdued." "Oh, he does he?" Redding smirked at the prosecutor, DA Ron Hayes. "They all say that, don't they, Mr. Hayes?" Hayes, a man whose ambition had long since eroded his spine, gave a weak, assenting shrug. "Bail is set at $750,000, to $50,000, Redding declared. Sarah gasped. "Your Honor, that is tantamount to no bail. He has no priors. He's not a flight risk. He is a danger to this community, Miss Jenkins." Redding slammed his hand on the desk, not with the gavel, but with his palm, an intimate gesture of rage. A man like that, with those charges, he's a flight risk by definition. He'll be back in the same gutter he crawled out of before the ink is dry. A man like that. The words hung in the air. "Your Honor," Malik said, his voice quiet but clear. It was the first time he'd spoken. It was raspy, but held an unexpected resonance. "You'll be silent, Mr. Jackson," Redding roared. "You speak when I tell you to speak. Bail is $750,000. Trial is set for 1 week from today. I want this one off my docket." "A week?" Sarah was pale. "Your Honor, I can't possibly prepare a defense in a week. I have motions to file, evidence to review." "Then you'd better start reading, counselor," Redding said, his eyes cold and dead. "Or you can advise your client to take a plea. Mr. Hayes, I expect a generous offer from your office to avoid wasting the taxpayers' time." "Yes, Your Honor," Hayes said. "Next case," Redding yelled. As Malik was led away, his eyes met Sarah's. She expected to see fear, or anger, or despair. Instead, she saw something that looked almost like patience. It was the calm of a man watching a storm, knowing he was the only one in the room who wasn't going to drown. Sarah Jenkins didn't just go back to her tiny windowless office. She went to war. For the next 72 hours, she lived on stale coffee and adrenaline. She filed a motion to suppress the evidence based on an illegal search. She filed a motion to dismiss based on Officer Keene's documented history of racial profiling, attaching 12 separate civilian complaints. She filed a motion for a continuance, begging for more time. She presented them in court on Thursday. Judge Redding treated them like personal insults. "Motion to suppress?" he said, holding the paper by the corner as if it were contaminated. Officer Keene stated he saw the defendant make a furtive gesture. That is sufficient probable cause for a search. "A furtive gesture, Your Honor?" Sarah argued, her voice rising. Officer Keene has used that exact phrase in his last 5 arrests, all of them black men, and all of them thrown out on review. "It seems to be a common gesture among his associates, then," Redding said flatly, ignoring the gasp from the gallery. Motion denied. The motion to dismiss? Denied. Civilian complaints are not convictions. Officer Keene is a decorated officer. The motion for a continuance? Denied. Ms. Jenkins, I am not going to hold your hand through this. You have a client who was caught red-handed with enough fentanyl to kill a small town. Either defend him or get out of the way. We are proceeding to trial on Tuesday. Sarah felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. This wasn't a court of law. It was a slaughterhouse. She met Malik in the courthouse holding cell. The place smelled of disinfectant and defeat. "He denied everything," Sarah said, slumping against the bars. "He's fast-tracking you, Malik. He wants you in prison. He doesn't care about the truth." Malik sat on the metal bench, his hands cuffed in front of him. He looked at her, his gaze penetrating. "You're a good lawyer, Sarah. You're fighting." "It's not enough," she whispered, her eyes burning with unshed tears. "The fight is rigged. The judge, the prosecutor, they're all on the same team, and we're not on it." "What about Officer Keene?" Malik asked. "The one who planted the drugs." "He's the key," Sarah agreed. "If I can break him on the stand. But Redding will never let me. He'll sustain every objection. He'll cut me off. He's protecting him." Malik nodded slowly. "So the trial is a sham. It's just a formality before the sentencing." "Yes," Sarah admitted, hating herself for saying it. "That's exactly what it is." "So what happens now?" Sarah took a deep breath. Now Mr. Hayes, the prosecutor, comes to us with a deal. He'll offer you something less than the maximum in exchange for you pleading guilty. He'll say it's the smart play." "And what do you say?" Malik asked. "I say it's extortion. But who say—" "Malik," she looked away. "If you go to trial with Redding on the bench, he'll give you the maximum. He'll stack the charges. He could give you 20 years. Easily." "20 years," Malik repeated, the words hanging in the stale air. "For something I didn't do." "The deal," Sarah continued, her voice hollow, "will probably be 5 to 7 years. It's a terrible choice. It's a hostage situation." Malik looked down at his cuffed hands. "So I either take 5 years for a crime I didn't commit, or I fight and get 20 from a judge who hates me for my skin color." "That's the system he's built," Sarah said bitterly. "Tell me about Judge Redding," Malik said, his tone shifting slightly, becoming more focused. What else does he do? What do you mean? This isn't just racism, is it? It's too fast. It feels like he's clearing his desk, like I'm an inconvenience he needs to sweep away. Sarah was stunned by his perception. You're right, that's exactly what it is. He's famous for it. He's got a big corporate case on his docket next week. Some billion-dollar lawsuit. The rumor is he clears his street crime docket so he can focus on the real law. A corporate case, Malik said, filing the information away. Petrodyne Corporation versus the EPA. Heard of it? Yeah, it's huge, Sarah said. The city's water supply is at stake. Redding will probably let them off with a fine and a pat on the head. He's notoriously pro-corporate. Malik nodded, a dark understanding in his eyes. Thank you, Sarah. You've told me everything I need to know. Before she could ask what he meant, the guard rapped on the bars. Jenkins, your time's up, and D.A. Hayes is here to see the prisoner. Sarah looked at Malik, her heart breaking. The deal is here. It's okay, Sarah, Malik said, standing up. You did your job. Ron Hayes was a man who wore his mediocrity like a well-tailored suit. He entered the holding cell area with a plastic smile. Miss Jenkins, Mr. Jackson, I wanted to have a talk. Save it, Ron, Sarah snapped. We know why you're here. To offer us a rotten piece of fruit from a poisoned tree. Hayes's smile faltered. Sarah, be practical. You saw what happened out there. Judge Redding is inflexible. He's convinced your client is a major dealer. If this goes to trial, he's going to throw the book at him, the entire library. He's innocent, Sarah said, her voice a low growl. That doesn't matter, Hayes hissed, his frustration showing. It matters what I can prove, and I have 50 grams of fentanyl and the word of a police officer. You have, what? A furtive gesture. You can't win. Not in 3B. He turned to Malik. Mr. Jackson, I'm prepared to offer a deal. You plead guilty today to simple possession. We drop the intent to distribute and the resisting arrest. I'll recommend 7 years. 7 years? Sarah exclaimed. It's a gift, Hayes shot back. Redding will give him 20, maybe 25 with enhancements. I'm saving this man's life. 7 years with good behavior, he's out in 3.5. For a crime he didn't commit. Take the deal, Mr. Jackson, Hayes said, ignoring Sarah and speaking directly to Malik. It's the only sane move. You're a smart guy. You can see the board. The game is over. Don't let your pride and a bad lawyer ruin the rest of your life. The insult hung in the air. Sarah was about to lunge at him, but Malik put up a cuffed hand. His voice was calm. What if I don't take it? Then, Hayes said, his voice turning cold, I will go back into that courtroom, and I will add a conspiracy charge. I'll say you were working with others. I'll bring in a gang enhancement. I will personally ask Judge Redding to sentence you to the absolute consecutive maximum. By the time I'm done, you will never see the sun as a free man again. Your choice. It was a threat. It was coercion. It was brutally, horrifically illegal, and it was happening right in front of a public defender. Malik looked at Sarah. Her face was a mask of white-hot rage and utter helplessness. He saw the tears she refused to let fall. He looked at Hayes. He saw a weak man drunk on borrowed power. He looked down. For the first time, he let his shoulders slump. He let the exhaustion, the fear, and the defeat, or the performance of it, wash over him. All right, he whispered, his voice cracking. I'll take it. Sarah's breath hitched. Malik, no. You did your best, Miss Jenkins, Malik said, not looking at her. He's right. The game is over. Hayes's plastic smile returned. A wise decision, Mr. Jackson. Truly. You won't regret this. He clapped his hands. "All right, let's go see the judge. He's waiting. He'll be delighted we cleared his docket." The walk from the holding cell back to Courtroom 3B was the longest of Sarah's life. She felt like a traitor, leading a lamb to slaughter to save it from a pack of wolves. They stood before Judge Redding. The courtroom was emptier now, the morning's cattle call finished. It was just them, the board stenographer, a few bailiffs, and 2 people in the back gallery. Sarah had noticed them before. A man and a woman, both white, dressed in nondescript business casual. They'd been at every one of Malik's hearings. She'd assumed they were law students or maybe reporters. Now they just looked like vultures. "Your Honor," Ron Hayes announced, his chest puffed out. "The people are pleased to report that we have reached a disposition in the case of Mr. Malik Jackson. The defendant has agreed to plead guilty to the lesser included charge of simple possession." Judge Redding leaned back, a slow, deeply satisfied smirk spreading across his face. It was the look of a predator who had just had his meal delivered. "Well, well," he said, his voice dripping with faux surprise. "It seems Mr. Jackson has found some common sense. Ms. Jenkins, I commend you. You've finally given your client some sound advice." Sarah's knuckles were white on the lectern. "Your Honor, my client is pleading under duress." "Nonsense," Redding snapped, his good humor vanishing. "Is the prosecutor threatening him? Are the bailiffs beating him?" "No. He is taking a generous deal to avoid the consequences of his actions. Do not undermine this plea, counselor, or I will hold you in contempt. And I'll retract the deal," he added, looking at Malik, "and we'll go right back to that 25-year maximum. Is that what you want?" Malik, his head bowed, shook his head. "No, Your Honor." "I thought not," Redding said, triumphant. "Very well, Mr. Jackson, you are pleading guilty because you are, in fact, guilty?" Malik was silent for a long beat. Sarah held her breath. "Yes, Your Honor," he said, his voice just above a whisper. "And you are doing this of your own free will?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Then I accept your plea," Redding said, picking up his gavel. "This court sentences you to the term agreed upon, 7 years in a state facility. This court is age—" "Your Honor," Sarah interrupted, a last desperate gasp of defiance. I'd like to make a statement on behalf of my client before sentencing." Redding's eyes were slits of fury. He was being delayed. "It won't change anything, Ms. Jenkins." "I am aware," Sarah said, her voice shaking but finding its steel. "But I will not stand by silently while this court, this system, forces an innocent man to plead guilty. You know he's innocent. Mr. Hayes knows he's innocent. This is not justice. This is a travesty. You are railroading him because he is black, because he is poor, and because you want to get to your corporate lawsuit. You are a disgrace to that robe." The courtroom went dead silent. The stenographer's fingers froze. The bailiffs tensed. Ron Hayes looked like he was going to be sick. Judge Redding's face went from pale to a deep, arterial red. He stood up, his voice a low, shaking roar. "Ms. Jenkins," he seethed, "you are in contempt. Bailiff, take her into custody." "And you, Mr. Jackson," he screamed, pointing a trembling finger at Malik. "The deal is off. You want a trial? You'll get a trial. And God help you, because I am going to bury you under this courthouse." The bailiff started to move toward Sarah, but they were too slow. "I don't think you will." The voice was not Malik Jackson's. The whisper was gone. The defeat was gone. This voice was new. It was cold, sharp, and carried the effortless authority of a man who had never been helpless in his life. Everyone froze. Even Judge Redding, mid-scream, paused. Malik Jackson stood up straight. His posture changed. The slump was gone, replaced by a ramrod spine. He raised his head, and the eyes that met Judge Redding's were not the weary, defeated eyes of a street criminal. They were the eyes of an analyst, a hunter. "What did you say?" Redding spat. "I said, I don't think you'll be burying anyone," the defendant said. He turned his head slightly toward the two observers in the gallery. "Now." The man and woman in the gallery stood up. They simultaneously reached into their jackets. The woman, Maria Karras, held up a gold badge. "FBI," she shouted, her voice filling the courtroom. "Nobody move!" The side doors of the courtroom burst open, and 6 more agents, all in tactical vests, flooded the room. They moved with terrifying, precise choreography. 2 went to the bailiffs, who raised their hands in confusion. 2 went to the stunned prosecutor, Ron Hayes. And 2, led by Agent Ben Carter, walked directly to the bench. "What is this?" Redding sputtered, his face a mask of confusion and rage. "What is the meaning of this? This is my courtroom. I am a federal judge." The defendant, Malik Jackson, uncuffed his own hands. He had a key. He tossed the cuffs onto the defense table. He reached into the waistband of his orange jumpsuit and pulled out a small, plastic-wrapped object. It wasn't a weapon. It was a wire. He tapped it. "And this," he said, his voice now amplified by the courtroom mic, "is Exhibit A." He turned to the bench, to the stunned judge. "My name is not Malik Jackson. I am Special Agent Marcus Thorne, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Public Corruption Task Force." Sarah Jenkins physically recoiled, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh my God." "Judge Arthur Redding," Agent Thorne continued, his voice ringing with absolute power. "I am the lead undercover agent on Operation Gavel Down. We have been investigating you for 18 months. "Investigating me?" Redding's voice was a high-pitched squeak. "For what? This is entrapment. This is a sham." "We were investigating you," Agent Thorne said, stepping past the bar, "for taking $1.2 million in bribes from the Petrodyne Corporation to throw their upcoming EPA lawsuit." Redding's blood drained from his face. He knew. He was caught. "But that's not what we got you for today," Thorne said, his voice dropping, becoming personal. "The racism, Arthur? We thought it was just a character flaw, a disgusting habit. But we didn't realize it was your standard operating procedure." Special Agent in charge. Maria Karras, the woman from the gallery, stepped forward. The controlled energy in the room had shifted. The air was now electric, dangerous. She held up the arrest warrant, the blue-backed paper trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the contained power it represented. "Arthur Redding." Karras's voice was not loud, but it cut through the stunned silence like a diamond blade. "You are under arrest. We have a federal warrant for your immediate detainment on charges of conspiracy to commit wire fraud, receiving bribes from a corporate entity, and 12 counts of obstruction of justice." Redding, who was still standing, looked as if he'd been shot. His mouth opened and closed. He was a man of words, but he had none. "Obstruction?" he finally stammered, his mind seizing on the one word he thought he could fight. He was a judge. He was the process. "Obstruction of what?" "I am the process." "Obstruction of me," Agent Thorne said, his voice quiet, drawing Redding's furious, panicked gaze. "When you threatened Ms. Jenkins with contempt for speaking the truth, that's witness intimidation. That's 1 count. When you threatened me, a defendant you believe to be helpless, with the retraction of a plea deal and the promise to bury me under this courthouse?" Thorne tapped the wire on his chest. "That's coercion and judicial terror. Counts 2 and 3. Redding's face was ashen. You're twisting my words. I was maintaining order." "Was it maintaining order when you conspired with the prosecution?" Thorne pressed on, his voice a cold, relentless scalpel. He gestured to Ron Hayes, who was trying to blend into the wood-paneled wall. "Agent Carter, don't let Mr. Hayes leave." Agent Ben Carter, who had been standing by the door, moved to block the prosecutor's path. Hayes looked like a cornered rat, his eyes darting between the judge, the agents, and the exit. "Ron Hayes," Thorne said, walking toward him. Hayes physically flinched. "This morning, in the courthouse holding cell, you threatened me. You said, and I quote, 'By the time I'm done, you will never see the sun as a free man again. Your choice.' That, Mr. Hayes, is suborning perjury. It's conspiracy to obstruct. It's about 10 other felonies. You are under arrest." Judge Redding told me to," Hayes shrieked, his voice cracking. He said to clear the docket. He said, do whatever it takes. I was following his lead. Tell them, Arthur. Tell them." Redding stared at Hayes with a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. He had been betrayed by his most pathetic, loyal sycophant. I never said such a thing," Redding roared. "He's lying to save himself." "It doesn't matter," Thorne said, his voice flat. "We have you on tape, Mr. Hayes. We have both of you. Take him." 2 agents grabbed Hayes by the arms. His legs gave out, and he didn't slide down the wall. He collapsed like a marionette, his spine turning to jelly. "My career. My family. Oh, God," he sobbed as they dragged him out. The courtroom was in absolute chaos. The stenographer's fingers were flying, a blur of motion. The 2 other bailiffs were standing with their hands raised, confused and terrified. The gallery was buzzing. Finally, Thorne turned his attention to the last piece. He walked over to the witness box, where Officer Robert Keene stood, frozen in a silent scream. His face was waxy, covered in a sheen of cold sweat. "Officer Keene," Thorne said. His voice was different now, not angry, not cold. It was almost sad. "You were the linchpin. You were the one who made it all possible." I don't know what you're talking about," Keene stammered, his hand reflexively going to his service weapon, only to find an FBI agent's hand already covering his. "Don't," the agent said. "We have been investigating you for 6 months, officer," Thorne said. "Long before Malik Jackson ever existed. We know about your habit of enhancing arrests of minority suspects." "That's a lie," Keene yelped. "I'm a good cop. You're a disgrace," Thorne said, the sadness vanishing. "The 50 grams of fentanyl. You checked it out of the evidence locker at 10:14 p.m., the night before my arrest. We have the logbook. We have the security footage. You see, we knew you were dirty. We just gave you an opportunity to prove it." Thorne pulled a small evidence bag from his pocket. It contained a phone. "This is your burner phone. We recovered it from your apartment this morning. You texted your sergeant, 'Package is in place. This one's a slam dunk.' You weren't arresting a criminal, Keene. You were the criminal." That was the moment. The truth, so stark and so absolute, hit the officer like a physical blow. His eyes rolled back in his head, and he pitched forward, fainting dead away. He would have cracked his skull on the witness box if the agent next to him hadn't caught him by the vest. "Medic!" the agent yelled. "Get him conscious. He's under arrest." Judge Redding watched it all, his entire world being dismantled, one person at a time, his accomplices, his enablers, his pawns, all gone. He was alone. And then, the rage, the true, ugly thing he had hidden beneath the robes, finally erupted. He grabbed his gavel, not as a tool of order, but as a weapon. "Order!" he screamed, banging it on the bench. "Order! This is my courtroom. You have no authority here. You black!" He stopped, choking on the word. But it was too late. It hung in the air, a toxic, black smoke. "You can't do this!" he shrieked, his voice raw. I am the law. I am the law. Agent Thorne walked right up to the bench, stepping over the line only lawyers were allowed to pass. He stood at the base of the dais, staring up at the man who had, just minutes before, held his life in his hands. "No," Thorne said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that filled the entire room. "You were just a bully in a robe. You confuse power with justice. You thought the law was a weapon for you to wield. You're not the law. You're just a criminal who found a good place to hide." Thorne pointed to the Great Seal of the United States on the wall behind the judge's head. "You took an oath to that. To justice. To equality. You swore to do equal right to the poor and to the rich, and you spat on it. You spat on it every day you put on that robe." "You used your racism," Thorne continued, his voice rising, "to justify your corruption. And you used your corruption to feed your racism. You saw me as an animal, a piece of trash to be cleaned up so you could get back to your real crime. The $1 million bribe from Petrodyne." Thorne was almost shouting now, the righteous fury of 18 months of investigation pouring out of him. "You don't get it, do you? You're not a victim. You're the disease. The only filth in this courtroom, Arthur. The only trash that needs cleaning up is you." "Get him down," Karras ordered. Agent Ben Carter didn't hesitate. He walked up the steps to the bench, grabbed Redding by the arm, and pulled him from his high-backed leather chair. Redding stumbled, falling to his knees on the lower platform. "Get your hands off me!" he shrieked, struggling as Carter pulled his arms behind his back. Click, click. The sound of the handcuffs locking was the loudest sound in the room, the sound of absolute finality, the sound of hard, cold karma. "You'll pay for this!" Redding screamed, his voice muffled as he was forced to his feet. "I'll have your badges. I'll have all your jobs. I have friends. Powerful friends." "The only thing you'll have," SAC Karras said, walking up to him as he was led away, "is a court-appointed lawyer, and I suggest you get a good one, though I doubt one as good as Ms. Jenkins will be available for you." Sarah Jenkins felt her knees buckle. The only thing that kept her upright was the solid oak of the defense table she was gripping. Her knuckles were white. Her entire world, which just minutes ago had been a suffocating, hopeless grey, had just exploded into 1,000,000 points of light. It was blinding. Agent Thorne, Special Agent Marcus Thorne, was standing right next to her, no longer a client, but a force of nature. His eyes, which she had mistaken for defeated, were now the sharpest, most intelligent eyes she had ever seen. They were the eyes of a surgeon who had just completed an impossible operation. "Breathe, Ms. Jenkins," Thorne said, his voice low and calm amidst the chaos. The courtroom was a blur of motion. FBI agents were securing the room. A pale, trembling Ron Hayes was being cuffed against the wall, muttering, I have a family. He told me." Officer Keene was being attended to by a medic, having been revived from his faint, only to be immediately informed he was under arrest. And then there was Redding. The judge, the God King of Courtroom 3B, was being led down from the bench. His robes were tangled, his face a grotesque mask of purple rage and absolute, primal terror. "You can't do this!" He was still screaming, his voice cracking. "This is entrapment! You're illegal! I'll have you disbarred! I'll have your badges! I am a United States federal judge!" "You were a United States federal judge." Special Agent in Charge Maria Karras corrected him, her voice like ice. "Right now, you're just a defendant. Move him out." As they passed the defense table, Redding's wild, terrified eyes locked onto Sarah. "You!" he spat, his face contorting. "You did this! You... lying!" Before he could finish, Agent Thorne stepped directly into his path, blocking his view of Sarah. Thorne was an inch taller than the judge, and where Redding was now a quivering mass of exposed ego, Thorne was solid granite. "That's enough," Thorne commanded. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. The authority in that one-word command silenced Redding more effectively than a gag. The fight visibly drained out of the judge, replaced by a sudden, pathetic, and total collapse. He was a puppet with his strings cut. The bailiffs, now under the direction of the federal agents, dragged him from the courtroom. The doors slammed shut, leaving behind a sudden, ringing silence. It was just Sarah, Thorne, SAC Karras, and a few other agents bagging evidence, the court reporter's transcripts, the audio files, the gavel itself. "My God," Sarah whispered, sinking into her chair. "My God." All this time. "Miss Jenkins," Thorne said, turning to her. He had unzipped the top of his orange jumpsuit, revealing the wiretaps and recording gear strapped to his chest. He looked like something out of a spy movie. "Sarah, I have to apologize." "Apologize," she said, her voice a squeak. "For what? You just saved my life. I thought I was going to jail." "For the deception," he said. His face was no longer the cold, hard mask of the agent, nor the broken mask of the defendant. It was warm, respectful. "You were put in an impossible position. My team and I. We've been watching Redding for 18 months. The initial investigation was for bribery. We knew he was taking money from the Petrodyne Corporation to guarantee he'd rule in their favor on the upcoming EPA lawsuit. We had his offshore accounts. We had wiretaps on their CEO, Richard Sterling. We had it all." "But then why this?" Sarah asked, gesturing to the orange jumpsuit he was still wearing. "Why you?" "We had the financial crime, but we kept hearing rumors about how he ran his courtroom," Thorne explained. "The racism, the coercion. We heard he was clearing his docket to make time for the big Petrodyne trial. But we couldn't prove it. The U.S. Attorney's Office needed to see if his corruption was just financial, or if it infected his entire judicial philosophy. They needed to know if he was just a bad judge or a threat to the Constitution." Karras stepped forward. "We call it an integrity test, Ms. Jenkins. We created a perfect test case. Malik Jackson, first-time offender, non-violent, but with a charge, fentanyl, that we knew would trigger Redding's worst biases. We assigned him an arresting officer, Officer Keene, who we also suspected of planting evidence. We wanted to see what the system would do. Would he get a fair trial? Would he get reasonable bail? Or would he be steamrolled?" "He was steamrolled," Sarah whispered, the horror of the last week washing over her. I tried to fight it. The motions." "We know," Thorne said, his voice soft. "We read every motion you filed. We saw you in his chambers. We watched you fight for Malik Jackson with everything you had. We thought you were just another public defender, going through the motions. But you weren't." He pointed to the wire on his chest. "We heard everything. We heard you tell me I was innocent. We heard you advise me against taking a plea, even when you thought I'd get 20 years. And then, in that courtroom," he shook his head, a look of genuine awe on his face. "You were magnificent, Sarah. You were the only person in this entire building willing to speak truth to power, even when you thought it would cost you your career, your freedom. You were his real public defender." I was just doing my job," Sarah said, the tears she had held back for a week finally starting to fall. They weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of pure, unadulterated relief. "You did more than that," SAC Karras said, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You became our star witness. Your statements, under threat of contempt, about him railroading a defendant to get to his corporate case. That wasn't just brave. That was the last nail. You connected his racism to his financial corruption. You gave us the why. You gave us the whole case, tied up in a bow. So what happens now? Sarah asked, wiping her eyes. Now, Thorne said, the real work begins. U.S. Attorney David Chen is holding a press conference in an hour. This building, this entire city, is about to be turned upside down, and we're going to need your help to clean it up. The press conference was a feeding frenzy. U.S. Attorney David Chen, a man known for his meticulous, understated approach, stood before a wall of cameras and microphones and calmly detonated a nuclear bomb in the center of the city's legal establishment. For 18 months, Chen began, his voice amplified across every news channel. The FBI and my office have been conducting a sweeping investigation into judicial misconduct, codenamed Operation Gavel Down. This morning, that operation culminated in the arrests of United States Federal Judge Arthur Redding, Assistant District Attorney Ron Hayes, and Officer Robert Keene. Flashes erupted. Shouts filled the room. "Mr. Chen!" a reporter yelled. "What are the charges?" "Judge Redding," Chen said, his face grim, "is charged with conspiracy to commit wire fraud, receiving over $1.2 million in bribes from Petrodyne CEO Richard Sterling, who was also arrested this morning, and a further 12 counts of obstruction of justice and deprivation of rights under color of law." "Deprivation of rights?" another reporter shouted. "What does that mean?" Chen nodded to SAC Karras, who stepped up to the microphone. "It means," Karras said, "that Judge Redding systematically used the power of his office to coerce guilty pleas from defendants he believed were beneath him. He was recorded on numerous occasions, expressing blatant racial bias and ordering prosecutors to threaten defendants with enhanced sentences to clear the docket. The key to this, Chen continued, was the courageous undercover work of Special Agent Marcus Thorne. He gestured, and Marcus, now in a sharp federal blue suit, stepped into view. The press went insane. A black FBI agent had been the one to bring down the city's most powerful judge. Agent Thorne, Chen said, posed as a defendant, Malik Jackson, in Judge Redding's court. He was booked on a planted, fictitious drug charge. He was denied reasonable bail, he was denied a fair hearing, and he was ultimately threatened by both ADA Hayes and Judge Redding himself to force a guilty plea. They did this. Chen's voice was laced with cold fury, not for justice, but for efficiency. They wanted Agent Thorne's case out of the way, so Judge Redding could get back to the business of getting paid. The final piece of the press conference was the most devastating. As of today, Chen announced, Judge Redding is suspended from the bench, and my office is filing an emergency motion to review every single case he has presided over in the last 10 years. Every guilty plea, every sentencing, every trial. We believe hundreds, if not thousands of individuals may have been wrongfully convicted or coerced into pleas by a corrupt judge. This is a dark day for this city, but it is the beginning of a necessary reckoning. For Sarah Jenkins, watching from her office, that last part was the most important. It wasn't just about one man, it was about all the Malik Jacksons who didn't turn out to be FBI agents. 6 months later, Sarah sat in a sterile, glass-walled conference room. The trial of the United States of America as Arthur Redding was approaching, and she was being deposed by Redding's new defense team. Redding, of course, had hired the most expensive, shark-toothed defense attorney in the state, Harrison Croft. Croft was a man who dressed in $5,000 suits and saw the law not as a system of justice, but as a complex game of chess where truth was the most boring, least effective piece. "Miss Jenkins," Croft began, his voice a silken, condescending purr. He paced the room. Redding sat at the table, looking gaunt and grey in an ill-fitting suit, his arrogance replaced by a sullen, petulant anger. "Thank you for joining us. I must say this is all very dramatic." "It is," Sarah agreed, her voice flat. She was not the same person she was 6 months ago. The terror was gone, replaced by a cold, hardened resolve. "You were the public defender for Malik Jackson, correct?" "Yes." "A man you'd known for, 48 hours?" "Yes." "And in that 48 hours you became so emotionally invested in this man that you stood up in open court and accused a sitting federal judge of being a disgrace?" U.S. Attorney David Chen, sitting beside Sarah, spoke up. "Objection. Emotionally invested assumes a fact not in evidence and is argumentative." "I'll rephrase," Croft said with an oily smile. "Ms. Jenkins, was it not a massive breach of professional decorum to scream at a judge in his own courtroom?" "I didn't scream," Sarah said calmly, "and I didn't accuse him. I stated a fact. He was forcing an innocent man to plead guilty to clear his docket for a corporate trial. I said it was a travesty. I said he was a disgrace. I was, as it turns out, correct." Croft's smile faltered. "Ah, but you didn't know he was innocent, did you? You just believed him. Because that's what you do, isn't it? You believe every sob story that comes through your office." "I believed," Sarah said, leaning forward, "the evidence, or lack thereof. I believed the 12 civilian complaints against Officer Keene. I believed the inconsistencies in the arrest report, and I believed that a $750,000 bail for a first-time, non-violent offender was not justice, but a hostage negotiation. My client's identity doesn't change those facts." "But you had no idea he was an FBI agent?" "No. So you were, in effect, a pawn, a dupe, used by the FBI in their elaborate, and I would say, illegal, entrapment scheme." "Objection," Chen said. "That's a gross mischaracterization." "I'm not a pawn, Mr. Croft," Sarah said, her voice cutting through the room. "I'm a witness. I was a witness to conspiracy, to witness intimidation, and to the blatant racist coercion of my client. Agent Thorne didn't entrap Judge Redding. He simply presented himself. Judge Redding's racism, his corruption, that was all his. He provided it freely." Croft paced for a moment, trying a new tactic. "Tell me about Ron Hayes, your colleague. He's pleaded guilty, as you know. He's agreed to testify against Judge Redding. His testimony is that he was pressured by Redding's overbearing personality. Do you agree?" "Ron Hayes was a coward," Sarah said flatly. "He was a man who threatened my client with 25 to life in a holding cell to force a plea he knew was false. He wasn't pressured. He was a willing participant. He was a bully who got caught." Croft stared at her. He was used to breaking witnesses, to making them nervous, to twisting their words. He was failing. Sarah Jenkins wasn't just a lawyer. She was the living, breathing proof of Redding's guilt. Her integrity was bulletproof. "We're done for today," Croft snapped, packing his briefcase. He had what he needed. He knew that putting Sarah Jenkins on the stand would be a disaster for his client. The trial itself was a 3-week spectacle. Harrison Croft's entire defense rested on one word: entrapment. "The government," he boomed in his opening statement, "didn't catch a criminal. They created one. They sent a highly trained, acting federal agent to pose as a black man specifically to elicit a racist response. They fed Judge Redding a script, and he read his lines. This isn't justice. It's a Hollywood production." But David Chen, in his methodical way, dismantled that defense piece by piece. First, he brought in the Petrodyne CEO, Richard Sterling, who had flipped completely. Sterling testified for 2 days, detailing the complex bribery scheme, the offshore accounts, the coded text messages. This, Chen argued, proved the motive. Redding wasn't just a racist, he was a racist in a hurry. He brought in Ron Hayes, who cried on the stand, and detailed how Redding had for years fostered a culture of efficiency that everyone knew meant get the minorities to plead, fast. He brought in Sarah Jenkins. Her testimony was calm, clear, and devastating. She simply walked the jury through the timeline, from her first meeting with Malik to her final, desperate stand in the courtroom. She painted a picture of a system so utterly broken, so completely dominated by one man's prejudice, that the truth never had a chance. "And when you called Judge Redding a disgrace?" Chen asked. "I meant every word," she said. But the final, fatal blow was Agent Marcus Thorne. He took the stand, and for 3 hours he was no longer Malik, no longer Thorne, but a dispassionate, precise narrator of fact. Croft tried to tear him apart on cross-examination. "Agent Thorne, you're a good actor, aren't you? You played the part of the poor, downtrodden black man perfectly, didn't you?" "I played the part of a U.S. citizen," Thorne corrected him, "who, like any other, is entitled to due process. I was simply a mirror, Mr. Croft. What Judge Redding saw in me, what he projected onto me, was his own." "You tricked him!" Croft shouted. "I did not," Thorne said, his voice dropping. "I did not trick him into being a racist. I did not trick him into taking a $1.2 million bribe. I did not trick him into threatening Ms. Jenkins. And I did not trick him into threatening me." "And on that note," David Chen said, standing up for his redirect, "Your Honor, the prosecution would like to play for the court audio exhibit 4B. This is the recording from Agent Thorne's wire in the holding cell with Defendant Ron Hayes." The courtroom went silent. The scratchy audio played. Hayes's voice. "By the time I'm done, you will never see the sun as a free man again. Your choice." The jury, a mix of 8 women and 4 men, visibly recoiled. "And now," Chen said, "Exhibit 5A, audio from the courtroom, when Judge Redding dismissed Ms. Jenkins's plea for her client." Redding's voice, booming, full of rage. "The deal is off. You want a trial. You'll get a trial. And God help you, because I am going to bury you under this courthouse." It was over. The jury didn't just hear the testimony. They heard the crime. They heard the raw, unfiltered voice of Arthur Redding, not as a judge, but as a tyrant. They heard the hard karma, recorded in digital clarity, playing back for the world. The jury deliberated for 45 minutes, guilty on all 17 counts. At his sentencing, Arthur Redding was given the chance to speak. He stood up, no longer in his robes, no longer in his expensive suit, but in a standard-issue orange jumpsuit, the same color Malik Jackson had worn. "This court is a joke." He spat the last of his venom. "This was a setup, a political assassination. I am the victim here. I was targeted." The new judge, a no-nonsense woman named Judge Olivia Grant, listened patiently. When he was finished, she looked at him over her glasses. "Mr. Redding," she said, her voice quiet, but carrying the weight of the entire judiciary. "You were not targeted. You were caught. You took an oath. The same oath I took. The same oath every judge in this building takes. An oath to administer justice without respect to persons, and to do equal right to the poor and to the rich. And you violated that oath. You violated it for money, and you violated it for prejudice." She paused, looking at the packed courtroom, which included Sarah Jenkins in the front row. "You," she said to Redding, "were not just a corrupt man. You were a corrupt system. You were the rot in the foundation. The damage you have done is incalculable. You have shaken the public's faith in the very institution I am sworn to protect. For that, there can be no leniency." The sentences for the other men were swift. Officer Robert Keene, for planting the evidence and perjury, received 15 years in federal prison. Ada Ron Hayes, for his cooperation, received 5 years, was disbarred, and would never practice law again. Petrodyne CEO Richard Sterling, for the bribery, received 10 years, and his company was hit with a record-breaking $2 billion fine by the EPA. "For your crimes," Judge Grant said, looking back at Redding, "conspiracy, bribery, obstruction, and the deprivation of rights under color of law, this court sentences you, Arthur Redding, to 30 years in a federal prison without the possibility of parole." The sound that Redding made was not a word. It was a high, thin wail, a sound of profound, animal despair. The hard karma hadn't just hit back, it had obliterated him. 1 year later, Sarah Jenkins walked into a coffee shop near the courthouse. She was no longer a junior PD, drowning in cases. She was now the head of the public defender's new Judicial Accountability Task Force, a unit created and funded specifically to review and appeal the hundreds of cases from Redding's court. So far, they had successfully overturned 42 wrongful convictions. Marcus Thorne was sitting at a table in the back, sipping a coffee. He was in a suit, but the tie was loosened. "Agent Thorne," Sarah said, sitting down with a smile. "Or should I say, Supervisory Agent Thorne." "Just Marcus is fine," he smiled. "And it's Director Jenkins, I hear." "Just Sarah," she laughed. "It's been a year." "It has," he said. They sat in a comfortable silence for a moment, two veterans of a war only they truly understood. "Is it better?" Sarah asked quietly. "The system? After all that? Is it actually better?" Marcus looked out the window at the courthouse, its stone facade gleaming in the afternoon sun. "It's not fixed," he said. "The world will never run out of men like Redding, or Hayes, or Keene, but that's not the point." He turned back to her. "The point is, the world also has people like you. People who will fight when it's hopeless. People who will speak up when they're told to be silent. Redding thought he was the law. He wasn't. We are. The people who hold it accountable. The people who fight for it." He raised his coffee cup. "You didn't just win a case, Sarah. You changed the battlefield. And that's a pretty good verdict." Sarah smiled, a real, genuine smile. She picked up her own cup and tapped it against his. "To the battlefield," she said. The air in the courthouse, once stale and full of despair, was finally starting to clear. And for the first time in a long time, it smelled a little like justice. That was the fall of Judge Arthur Redding, a story of hard karma, where arrogance and racism collided with the last person you'd expect. But it leaves you wondering, how many Reddings are out there without an FBI agent to stop them? What did you think of that incredible twist? If you love stories about justice, about the system being forced to look in the mirror, then show your support. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to see it, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel for more dramatic stories every week. Let me know in the comments, who was the real criminal in that courtroom before the FBI showed up? Thanks for listening.